Hello and welcome to the RPG Rundown. My name is Seth.
And my name is Jeff. From Dungeons to Deep Space, we've got the systems and the stories for your table. Well, hello there. Welcome to episode 41. Our critical review series wraps up right here as we discuss the final letter in our critical review, and that is, of course, the learning curve. And so, learning a TTRPG system can affect not only how players, but also how GMs prepare to bring people into a giving system.
Absolutely. The learning curve of a TTRPG determines how quickly players engage, how
Oh, yeah.
confidently a GM runs a session, and how long a group sticks with the system. A steep learning curve isn't bad, and a shallow learning curve isn't good necessarily,
Mhm.
automatically, but each creates specific pressures, joys, and friction points at the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the most important things I think you can figure out is, what kind of learning curve your table is ready for. Like I've played with some online TTRPGs with friends who are very experienced in the space and they like a more complex game. But my table, where my wife and friends are locally, they don't like a complex game. But yeah, so one of the things we want to look at is how hard is the game to learn, and that is, in its simplest and so, what's the difference in a game that has like a session zero and go versus, three sessions before anyone knows what a reaction is, right? And
Yeah,
that's kind of the big difference there because we've played games and we've test played games here on the channel that have had very simple learning curves.
yeah,
And, by the time we get middle way through the intro adventure, we all know how to play the game and we're just having fun. And then on the other hand, we've played some games that are a bit more complex, and we're still looking up rules 4 hours into the recording, right? And
absolutely.
so
Yeah,
yeah, so that's kind of that's what we're asking here, how hard is the game to learn? And so whenever we look at the learning curve during a critical review, that's what we're asking. That's what we're talking about. How easy or how hard is this game to pick up and to play? And so, yeah, and really this all goes into the onboarding experience because there's a good chance, if you're looking into a new TTRPG, you don't know how to play it, and your table probably doesn't either. And so that learning curve is going to be a big deciding factor on whether you want to take it on or not.
absolutely. And like, what do we mean by learning curve? For kind of what is let's define it in TTRPG context, right? It's you know we'll kind of give it three hard points.
Hmm.
Rules density, right? How much information has to be absorbed to have an understanding of the game, whether it starts as a basic understanding and then grows, or whether it's a lot of information that you need to have up front. I know several systems that you have to kind of hurry up and learn,
Hmm.
even in session zero.
Right.
So that's one. Then a conceptual complexity. How how hard are the ideas of the system to grasp, right? Again, we've had a wide variety of systems that we've play tested, and we have things like Traveler, where the character creation itself is a lot to grasp. It's a lot of
Hmm.
information. It's a lot of complexity in taking your character down, one track, and you're, the whole point is that you're creating your background as you go, and it's very
Right.
cool. Um,
Hmm.
which I found out recently as a side note. The early BattleTech RPGs literally were Traveler with a kind of BattleTech skin on it.
Oh, really?
So thinking about
Okay,
it
cool.
that way, Jeff, we might
Hmm.
help us as we try that one later.
Right.
Um,
Yes, for sure.
but yeah, so conceptual complexity. How hard is it to grasp? And the third one is procedural mastery. How long
Hmm.
until players are confident in that they know how to play? How is it? How long does it take for them to know the basics of the core mechanics?
Mhm.
stuff like that. So, looking at the learning curve, it's not how complex is a game. It's
Mhm.
how it's all of those things together. How dense are the rules? How easy is it to understand? And how much effort does it take to like get it down? And
Yeah.
there's some
And
games that have very complex rules, but they're really easy to get down.
yeah. And so one thing I would say goes into maybe fits in the procedural mastery there. I would also kind of add into that, like how similar is this game to maybe games your players are comfortable with, right? Because if a
Sure,
game is, already like 5e, then everyone's going to pick it up pretty quick because they're like, oh, that's like a reaction in 5e, or that's like this in 5.
absolutely,
And so if it's similar to something they've already played, the learning curve is probably going to be a lot less for them just because they're going to be able to have something to compare it to. And they're like, oh, this is just this with a different name. And so I
absolutely.
think that helps a lot.
I mean, I think an example of that for us was the Cosmere RPG when
Mhm.
we tried it out for the first time. It was very similar, but there were some distinct differences, and there was
Sure.
the
Yeah.
addition of the narrative or the plot die, right?
Mhm.
So it was
Right.
almost like 5e with an additional mechanic. They
Yeah.
changed up initiative a little bit, which I
Mhm.
liked,
Yeah, the
and added
initiative's
some
great.
actions. And then they had those plot die mechanics that they could introduce when there was something really important to the story. And so
Right.
that was kind of it as far as the
Mhm.
major differences. And so sitting down for the first time to play, you and I got it really easily.
Yeah. Yeah, picked it up
Um,
pretty quick. Yeah.
yeah. But someone who has not played any system,
Right.
it may be different. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, but kind of moving into that, like how does learning curve shape players' experience, Jeff?
Yeah. So when we get into that, and a lot of times that's what we're looking at. It probably if you're watching our videos, there's a good chance you're a fairly experienced TTRPG player or GM. And so really what we're kind of looking at here is, when I'm looking at a new game, and this is something, again, I have a table of inexperienced players and I have a table of experienced players. And so I know I can throw difficult stuff at one table and not at the other. But one of the things I always like to ask, and what I think all new players need, number one is going to be immediate agency, and that means they know what they can do right away. And that way they're not asking, "Can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this?" Because that kind of breaks to me. It breaks the immersion of the game. Like you're asking what you can do, what you can't do. And so one of the things I think they need to know fairly quickly is what your character can actually do, or maybe what
Yeah.
you can do in this game, right? If
And
it's a sci-fi game.
I think we're talking
Mhm.
outside of that brand new to RPG player who's like,
Mhm.
can I do this? Like
Sure, sure,
those
sure. Yeah, because
players
you
are
get
going to
that a
ask
lot with them.
questions. But
Yeah.
in general, if you have someone who has played an RPG before
Mhm.
and they are trying to figure out mechanically
Mhm.
if they can do
What can they
something
do?
cool,
Yeah.
that's what we want them to understand, right?
Mhm.
That's the
Right,
immediate
absolutely.
agency.
Yeah. Yeah, and we actually seen, I remember pretty quickly, we play tested, oh
Draw
man, wow, I'm
steel.
so bad with remembering. Yeah, draw still. Yeah,
I
exactly.
knew where
And
you're
so
going.
yeah, yeah, exactly. 'Cause anytime we say something cool, we know it was probably draw still because there's so many cool things you can do in draw still.
Well,
And yeah,
everyone was level 1 and we were throwing out like epic abilities and
oh,
attacks
we
and
were doing
stuff like that.
amazing things. Yeah, and I don't know, it was one of those games that I felt like picked up pretty quickly. And
We
yeah, so
did, however, the initial it it didn't look like it was
mhm,
going to be easy to understand at
right.
first,
Yeah. Yeah.
which we'll get into that
That
later.
that is true. That is true. Yes. And so okay, so I'll go off that with immediate agency, so they know what they can do rather quickly. Number two is like predictable outcomes, and really that is kind of understanding what roles mean. And so I think this all comes down to the dice system that's being used. Is the dice system familiar? Is it something completely new? Does it have some sort of unique dice that you have to keep referring to the book to understand what that dice means? That's not a bad thing, but it does. It, increase the complexity for a player that's not super familiar with the game. And so, yeah, so predictable outcomes. Do they understand, know, are able to remember what dice rolls do? Are they remember, or do they know which dice they need to grab for certain things? Do we have modifiers, or do we have additional dice that get added in? Things like that. They need to know predictable outcomes. And then the last one I'm going to kind of say here, and I think this is a good one. It's low cognitive load,
Yeah.
which is basically, can they focus on like one thing at a time? Or do we have every time you do one action, you have like 15 rules that you need to abide by to make them happen? And and again, we're not saying one is better than the other. I think one is better for a certain table and one's better for another table.
Yeah.
But if every time a player wants to scale a wall, they have to refer to like four different rules, that's going to increase the complexity, and it's going to mean they're probably going to have a hard time remembering exactly what all they need to do to accomplish that. So that's just going to increase the time it
Absolutely.
takes to learn the game or master the game.
I think that cognitive load also,
Mhm.
if you have character sheets that have like all the abilities on it,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Not just the abilities maybe that your character has, but like, for example, Star Wars Fantasy Flight, on their character sheets, it lists all the available abilities,
Mhm.
and
Oh, yeah.
and then every character has, you know, a
Mhm.
certain dice pool that they get for that. So like, if you're just an average person, you'll have an average
Mhm.
dice pool. But if you've put some points into it, you will get an above average chance of,
Mhm.
you'll have a better chance of rolling higher, right? And so that one shows all the abilities, right?
Mhm.
D&D 5e doesn't necessarily show all of them,
Mhm.
um, because it usually is tied to your stats, first of all, and then and then it leaves it kind of leaves it to the GM of, well, what is, you know, picking a lock, right?
Mhm. Right.
Well, that's going to be, unless you have taken a skill and you have written it on
Right.
your character
And you're stuck.
sheet, then I'm just going to tell you to do a dexterity check,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I
um,
think another good example, or sorry, were you done?
no, that was it. Just
Okay.
like the two
Okay.
different examples. So,
Yeah. So when you were saying that, another one popped in my head, and this is one that I would actually say is a good thing, even though it has a higher cognitive load, and that would be like City of Mist. And because
yeah,
City of Mist, anything you do, you get to use your experiences, and so you can go through and pick. I want to use this experience and this experience and this experience and this experience because I can make it all apply to this action that I'm doing. And so to me, that has a higher
yeah,
cognitive load, but at the same time, it has a higher payoff. And that's where it's like not one is better than the other. I mean, sometimes you'll have a
yeah,
really shallow learning curve and people pick it up really fast, but they also get bored of the game really fast as well.
yeah.
And so that's where like you want a game that is simple enough for beginners to pick up, but also complex enough to keep them interested in growing, wanting to learn and do more in the game. So it is kind of a balancing act there.
Yeah, absolutely. And similarly,
Hmm. It is late,
um,
by the way, guys, for
it
anyone
is
wondering.
very late. We actually had audio difficulties for an hour before we could get going on
Yeah,
this.
yeah, fun tech stuff.
So, please forgive us if we are just kind of breezing through some of this because we've been trying
Right.
to talk about it for a while.
And by the way,
But
guys, learning curve is easier with adequate sleep.
that's true.
That should be noted as
That's
well.
true. But GMs also face a learning curve. However, it's going to be different, right? So, they have it has to be you have to learn how to administer the system. You have to
Hmm.
learn how to prepare the pacing of the system, the pacing of the turns. Um, you know, encounter design. How hard is it to build a balanced scene, or uh, are encounters overly ambiguous? That can also be sometimes a detriment, right?
Hmm.
Well, you can just do anything. Well, great. Then if I don't have a mechanic to gamify what we're talking about, then we literally are just sitting around telling a story together. And we're
Right.
not having that random chance element that turns it into a
Hmm.
game,
Right.
So it could also be that. But then also having to recall rules. How easy is it? Is there a GM? We'll get into tools later, but does the GM have like good tables or a cheat sheet or something? Or does the
Mhm.
system give the GM suggestions for things to say or
Mhm.
how to run certain things?
Right.
it's a steep curve, can empower a GM with the tools to make it, to prepare more maybe. Whereas in, maybe a shallower curve reduces prep time, but it may limit the kind of scenario variety, right? And
Right.
one of the things that Jeff and I have when we try to do a critical review of a system, which, learning curve is the L, critical review, if we didn't mention that already.
Right. Yeah.
Then we try to review how easy is it to run, right, as a GM. And we have had some, Jeff and I love the setting of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Absolutely love
absolutely.
it. One of our favorite shows. We could talk about it for hours. However, the beginner box, which is what Jeff and I tested for Avatar, did not have great onboarding for players or the GM. Yeah. And that's coming from people who have tried, we have both played 20 plus TTRPG systems.
Oh yeah.
We have tested.
Yeah, that was a tough one.
Multiples. It was so tough.
I played.
Yeah, it was like the encounters were very ambiguous and sandboxy, which can be a strength. However, in this short, truncated little intro adventure they're trying to get you through, they also are like, well, you've got a few weeks before you can make it there. What are you going to do in a couple weeks? Am I just going to give them random encounters? I don't know. What am I supposed to be doing with these 2 weeks travel time? In this intro adventure that's supposed to be introducing you to things. So it did not translate as well as, say, Daggerheart or Draw Steel or even the Cosmere RPG. They have much better onboarding tools and things built in, so that it helps GMs facilitate all those things. So
and that's one thing I will say, just with the experience that we have from doing this show, is whenever we're playtesting something, the prep is very different if I'm playing versus GMing it, because we kind of alternate who does what. And I know whenever sometimes I'm GMing and then we'll playtest it, and you guys will be like, oh, that was super easy. It was easy to pick up. And then I'm from the GM side. I'm like, what are y'all talking about, man? There was so much there.
Yeah.
And so it can really, and so there's that kind of balance too. Is it, what's the learning curve like on the GM side versus the player side? Some can be like really easy on the player side and then super complex on the GM. Maybe not super complex, but maybe just a bit outside of what you're used to. And I think that's where I struggle more than anything, is when something is just way out there, further away than what I'm used to playing. But yeah, there's absolutely a difference between like player side and GM side.
Absolutely.
Okay. You got anything else to add on the GM side there?
I don't think so, other than, if you can't learn something very easily, or if you're confused by it, your players are going to be confused by it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So
with that, I'm going to go into what I'm going to call the 3 dimensions of learning curve.
Okay.
And so these are, I think pretty much we've broken almost everything down into 3s here, which is good, and so here's the 3. I'm going to start with, we're going to go through the different complexities of it. And there's going to be 3 areas that we can look at these complexities. Number 1 is going to be the mechanical complexity. And so this is going to be, the number of rules, the number of subsystems, the number of exceptions, maybe even, the number of dice and modifiers, and, the math that kind of goes into that. Right. Where is that? What is that? Is there a lot of rules? Are there very few rules? And honestly, there's kind of a trade-off there. Like sometimes there's a lot of rules, and so there's a lot of stuff you got to remember, but then sometimes there's not enough rules and you have no idea how to handle certain situations. And I don't know. Sometimes when you're at the GM side and the players realize you don't know how to handle it, they just start making up their own rules. And you're like, no, wait, let's rein this back in,
Yeah.
Or maybe I just have a table full of metagamers. That's very possible too. But that's how it goes on my side of things. But yeah, so mechanical complexity, is there a ton of rules, ton of subsystems, tons of different ways things can be done, or is it very shallow, very limited? Number two is going to be the character complexity. So, how hard is it to build and advance characters? So, how hard is it to build that character? And this kind of, I'm going to actually dip into tools here a little bit because some systems are just easier when there's a digital builder. Digital builders to me are typically easier to use than a paper builder with a book. That's not to say that a paper builder is difficult, but sometimes paper builders are.
But I
Sometimes they're
think
super complex.
sure. I think
Yeah.
though, if you're taking it in a vacuum, right? If you're taking
Hmm.
each system in a vacuum, scratch digital tools and you're just reading the book, right?
Just reading the book. Yeah.
If you're just reading the book,
Hmm.
there can be a wide variety. And
Oh, absolutely.
we've looked at, you know, the most complex of character creation, I think, is probably Traveler.
Hmm. Oh, yeah.
Um, and then, like I said, maybe like the older BattleTech now because it's basically Traveler. But that said, um, you know,
Traveler,
it's
even though Traveler was complex,
it
they
does
almost
walk you
simplified
through
it with
how to
a
advance it.
roadmap. Yeah.
Yes, there's a little bit of a roadmap,
Yeah.
but it was very complex. But then
Yes.
we have something like Dragonbane, where it's the character class page is literally one page.
Hmm.
And if
Oh,
you're
yeah.
going to create a character with that class, you literally choose from like 5 different categories that are on that one page or make one up. Like if there's something
Mhm.
if you want, if your character has like a special item and there's 4 listed as examples, it'll often say or pick whatever you want, you know. And
Right. Yes.
and so character creation is super fast in
Hmm.
in that game, or like Tales from the
Right.
Loop is the same way because they're both by Free League Publishing and
Hmm.
kind of same system ish.
Right.
But yeah, it can be very complex.
Hmm.
It can you that's why a lot of TTRPGs have a session 0 because you
Right.
need that time to focus on the entire party creating their characters, making sure they're interacting together. And then sometimes you can just show up.
Right. And just show up and play.
And you got
Someone
it.
hands you a character sheet and go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then so that's the thing, yeah, and character complexities. And then also, how to build the character is one part of it. Then how difficult is it to advance? What do level ups look like? Do you get to add do you add several things? Do you gain powers? Do you gain other things? Or can you multi-class? Can you is there like a limited supply of different things you can do? I don't know. So within the level up, how complex is the level ups? Now, as a GM, I like to do level ups at the table. Usually, whenever I think we're going to be leveling up, assuming I'm doing milestone, I will try to save a little bit of time at the end of the session for everyone to go through their level ups. Or at the following session, I will save a little bit of time at the beginning for everyone to go through and do their level ups. That way I can answer any questions or approve anything that my metagamers want to do. But yeah, so how complex is that? And I've seen systems that have incredibly simple, to some that were pretty complicated to level up and stuff. Of course, any game where you're gonna like multi-class and stuff like that, add some complexity to it.
Yeah.
Um, but so going from that, the third and final one I would say here is the play complexity. So this is when you're actually sitting down at the table and playing the game. Now, I think this obviously goes into a little bit of everything, but a lot of this play complexity is going to be happening during combat. Whenever it's actually your turn, what do you do on your
Yeah.
turn? Do you have an bonus action movement? Do you have action points? Do you have is it based on if you want to move quickly or slowly, right? Because different systems have different ways to do initiative, and so I kind of throw initiative in here as well. Like, is the initiative simple? When it's actually your turn, is there a lot of options to do? Is there a minimal amount of options to do, or can you just do anything you want? Uh, and then the next one would be like, what resources need to be tracked? Pretty much every game, and I'm sure I'll be proven wrong, but most games that I can think of right now have some sort of HP. But does it also have something like stamina or stress or armor
Yeah.
or hope? Different
Yeah.
resources that need to be tracked because that all adds a layer of complexity too. And something that personally I didn't think about from the GM side as I was running my Daggerheart campaign. I was like, in my opinion, this is simpler than 5e. And then one of my players was like, yeah, but I keep forgetting to count this and count this. And I'm like, oh, resource management. I wasn't even thinking about that because
Right.
GM side, I just need fear. But from their side, they're keeping up with armor and hope and everything else. So that does add a level of complexity to it. But yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts. And I'm not giving like a on these the mechanical character and play. I'm not giving a one's bad, one's good. This is just things to look at as you're judging a system on the learning curve. If you're trying to decide if it's for your table or not, look at these things. Look at the number of rules. Look at how hard it is to build the character. How many options are there for building the character? And then when play begins, how many options are there? How many resources need to be tracked and things like that. And all this is going to affect, the player and the GM differently.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Hmm.
And for both, you know, onboarding is imperative, right?
Hmm.
How is it? How, like, what are the initial impressions?
Hmm.
How, you know, is the does the player understand the core resolution mechanic? Do they understand what their character can do and how to succeed at basic tasks? For the GM, you know, how do you set up a scene? What are the consequences of, you know, certain actions? And then how do you also as a GM improvise within the rules, right?
Hmm.
Um, that's why a lot of times when we're testing these systems, we're trying to do the, kind of like do this first, play test, adventure module, beginner box, tutorial, whatever it's called. We're trying to do that first
Hmm.
to get the full onboarding experience as both GM and players.
Right.
Because, you know, that first game session is going to determine a lot of whether you keep playing.
Hmm. Oh yeah.
um, or whether you have so much fun you're like, oh, that was a one shot, but I want to play again.
Hmm.
So, yeah, we've had a lot of that. But part of that goes into the design, right, of the system.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And so, next thing we're going to kind of go into is the role of system design in smoothing that curve, right? So, like, even if there's a lot going on, there's a difference in I don't know how the best way to say it. Like, you can have a really, really tough learning curve where there's a lot to learn, but it's so smooth that it doesn't feel all that complex. And so there are different design elements in games that can make a game or can help or hinder the learning and the learning curve, right? So, kind of looking at the mechanics, like, do we have unified mechanics, meaning, the mechanics across the board are relatively the same? Or do we have many subsystems, right? Because you get into like different subsystems where there are different rules for this area or this area or this type of character or that type of character in this environment or that, right? And so when you get into a lot of different subsystems, you have to learn, different things like that. And next is going to be, we kind of hit on it already a little bit, but clear character sheets is the character sheet. And so just even from a graphic design standpoint, is it a clean, easy to read, clear hierarchy character sheets that you can easily glance at, see what you need, and move on?
Yeah.
Is it paper? Is it digital? Right? And but really, just having a good character sheet makes a huge difference. And even kind of like what you're saying is like the options you need on the character sheet, or is every
And Jeff froze for just a second. Come back, Jeff.
Hey, can you still hear me?
Oh, now I can hear
All
you.
right, I'm back.
Yep.
Okay, I have no idea what happened. I looked at, all right, where did I make it to? Did I make it all the way through character sheets? Did you hear that?
Yes, I think we did. I think we did.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'll move on. So character sheets to me, now I'm a graphic designer, so a good character sheet means probably more than it should. to me. But a clear character sheet where everything's easy to reference, super important. Next is going to be reference tools, and this is one like a quick start rules. I think quick start rules are amazing. Every time we play a new system and I have people joining in, usually Seth will have access to all the rules, but a lot of the other guys, I'll just send them the quick start rules, and then maybe I'll have a rule book available if they really want to deep dive. But most time it's just like, hey, here's the quick start rules, and we'll cover stuff in as we play. But then one that I don't know if ever how many systems have this, but I first experienced like the actual like cheat sheet with Daggerheart, and I think Daggerheart does it really well with their little like pop out sheets and stuff.
Hmm.
And so like all my players at my table, when we're a year and a half into a Daggerheart campaign now, and they still keep their cheat sheets there. I don't think anyone uses them anymore, but
Right. So I don't know if
they
you
keep them.
remember, because I'm pretty sure I've ran you through a one shot of the Star Wars RPG like
I
years
have played the
ago.
Star Wars RPG. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but in the beginner
Hmm.
boxes, the character folios
Hmm.
had that cheat sheet essentially.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
And
Okay.
it was an open book. Basically, it was like a booklet, right? It's like a folio that's like three or four pages long, and you would open it up, and instead of having the character sheet solidly on one page, it had it split across half of each page that you had to open to. That way, it
Hmm.
basically had that kind of sidebar like Daggerheart has down the
Oh yeah,
left
yeah,
and
yeah.
right side.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
See, that's great.
and it even had it a little more clearly than Daggerheart in that when you turned the page, that was how you leveled up. And
Ooh. Okay.
it showed you, okay, you've leveled this ability up. Now you have 3 green die and a yellow die,
Yeah.
for this increased ability,
Right.
capability. So, so it's been around. Daggerheart's definitely not the first to use it.
Mhm.
They've been one of the most prevalent and recent for sure.
Right.
Especially because the Star Wars RPG from
Yeah.
Fantasy Flight Games
When we first went around
is
Daggerheart,
hard to
I
come
vaguely remember you
by.
saying that. Yeah. Yeah. So I remember when we first were looking at Daggerheart, I was saying how cool it was. And I think I do remember you saying that there was another system that had it that you knew of that had it before.
Yeah, which
Um,
they did say, we took a lot of
oh yeah, for sure.
influence from the Star Wars Fantasy Flight Games. We took a lot. I mean, from like there was like a list of like 20 different RPGs they took influences
Yeah.
from.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think that was really cool. They did put all that out there that they took that, they're not claiming anything is like their own or that they created all that self. So no, but yeah, cheat sheets. And so for reference there, I'm talking about a cheat sheet. It literally sits beside your character sheet and you like pull it out and it literally has an arrow pointing to every part of the character sheet with a little explainer of what that is. And so just having access to like those kind of reference tools are super, super cool. Just having access to a quick start guide, something like that. And even on the GM side, having access to, I love to have a DM screen and then have like, a little printout of different rules back there that I can just quickly reference. But
Yeah,
having some sort of like even quick start GM reference guide type stuff tells you, how to calculate DC and how to do measurements and things like that's really helpful. The next I'm going to say is intuitive terminology. And so I've found a lot of games try to get really, really creative with their terminology. And I'll be honest, a lot of times it's just confusing. And I will say, and I hate to say it because so far I've really enjoyed City of Mist. But sometimes the terminology in City of Mist is so darn complicated. Like I was trying to pull up my sheet here so I could remember it, but I remember reading through some stuff, like even like the player moves, like one of them's like hit with all you got, and change the game, go toe to toe. Like, I mean, those sound really cool, but then you really got to read in it and try to figure out what it actually means.
well, and if it's been a while since we've played City of Mist
It
and read
has, it
through those
has, yeah.
rules, because the rules definitely said, hey, these are like their abilities, and so
Hmm.
you can use any of these abilities, they give it all you
Yeah.
got or whatever.
Well, so those
And,
that are
and
those
as
are actually
long
the
as the
core moves.
GM, right, and well,
Yeah.
right, but they're specific to those characters or those classes, right?
No, no.
And
So
so it's
those are
like,
like that's like your core moves, like your investigate, your convince, face danger. That's within the hit it with all you got, the toe to toe, and
right, but
your
they're still abilities though. They're still like
Yeah.
skills essentially. When it boils down to it, they're called different, something different because they're trying to limit how much information is on the character sheet in City of
Right.
Mist. And so they're basically giving you these, instead of having like lock picking and, persuasion and blah 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 blah. You're
Right.
right. They're giving you, the terminology can be a little misleading, but
Right.
I would also say, even some well-meaning games have terminology issues, like Daggerheart, for example. I have literally recorded entire episodes about the fact that they should not have used the word seraph for a class.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So if you have not heard that, go look it up. Go look at the pocket dimension and watch Matt and I's conversation about
Right.
seraph and why linguistically it is completely different than every other class.
Mhm.
Because every other class in Daggerheart is, fighter, rogue, wizard. I mean, like they're standard classes, and then you have this one class that is trying to be something different. And I think that
Yeah.
they chose that difference because they were trying to separate themselves from religion. I mean, when it boils down to it, I think they literally were trying too hard to separate their class and mechanics from religion for a cleric or a priest, right? Or a paladin.
A little
And
bit silly
so,
because seraph is the name of an angel.
right,
I mean, one
exactly.
of the primary
But
angels in
so
scripture.
instead of doing that, right. So instead of doing that, they got more religious, and then they also used a term that already exists to describe a race or a being. And yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
But terminology is important, people.
Terminology is important. And so even getting into like I feel like every game has some sort of like AC. And so some will call it like AC, some will call it armor, and some's like your hard to hittedness, or like, they have different ways. I don't know. Sometimes the terminology is intuitive, sometimes it's not. And so that's something that's kind of important. And I think that's something that like game designers can sometimes I don't feel like you need to reinvent the wheel, right? People know what health points are. We don't have to call it something other than HP because we don't want to be like D&D. Like sometimes I think we just got to kind of keep it with what people understand. Now,
Yeah.
if your system is working in a completely different way, okay, that makes sense. But if it's still just how many hits you can take until you die, HP makes sense. We all know what it means,
And that's pretty
right? And
standard.
so, yeah, that's pretty standard. But sometimes systems will get kind of fancy and they'll try to change it up. And so, in my opinion, with things like that, with terminology and stuff, I think it's usually best to use things that are the easiest or the most commonly understood. But then, okay, we'll move on into progressive complexity. And so this is where a system will kind of introduce new rules gradually, right? Like, okay, at level 1, you don't need to know every rule of the game. You need to know this set of rules. Oh, now we've hit level 2. Okay, so now we're going to start introducing this new complexity. Think about like a video game. Video games do this very, very well, right? You jump into WoW. What are you going to do? You're going to kill a bunch of wolves. You're going to spend your first 2 hours killing the most basic creatures in the world and learning 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, because that's the only abilities you got. 2 hours in, okay, maybe you've added 2 more abilities and an AoE, right? It gradually moves you into the game, and you see this with the RPG games and probably about everything but sports games. You have some sort of gradual introduction to the game. And so I think doing that with TTRPGs, when you're designing a system, just gradually introducing new rules and complexities. And so I think that makes it a lot easier to learn and get into.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that, that's something that's important. A lot of systems will do that with the level mechanic, but then some,
Mhm.
unfortunately, will leave out, some basic abilities because it's like, oh, well, you don't have any reactions as a paladin because
Mhm.
paladins don't have very many reactions. So you just don't even know how to do a reaction until
Right.
it just
Yeah.
comes up later,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
For sure.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, like, along with a lot of that too, and how rules are introduced gradually, I think is also what's the dynamic of your table? What's the dynamic of the group? Do you have experienced players? Do you have new players? Do you have players who understand the complexity of an RPG or a tabletop type game? Um, you know, or do you have that one player that is just an expert and they either know all the rules or they have to look up every rule right then.
Mhm.
It can be a bottleneck. A it could be a help for you as a GM to remember the rules. Um, so it's that. It's also GMs having to try to manage uneven learning curves. If
Mhm.
Jeff really struggles to understand his class, and somebody else
It happens.
really picks theirs up, then the GM might have to give a little bit more attention to Jeff, in that moment to make
Mhm.
sure he understands how things are supposed to work. So, but yeah, again, no right or wrong in how complex it is with the group, as long as you know what you're getting into.
Mm. Right.
So,
For sure. Yeah. Okay.
um,
So,
but yeah, go ahead.
okay, I was just saying, going into like the kind of when everything levels out, like kind of looking at like long term, once you've actually been playing the game for a little while, and what are the rewards of a steep learning curve versus a low uh, learning curve or shallow learning curve. Look at me with my terminology. I don't even know high, low, big, small, whatever. So systems with like really really high ceilings, like it's going to take you a while to really pick it up, to really know what you're doing. But within that also usually opens up for a lot of like tactical depth, right? It opens up to allow you to really get into a tactical game. And again, some tables really really love a tactical game. Some tables really love a narrative game. Most tables are split, so you got to try to make everyone happy in some fancy way, right? But it allows really really deep tactical depth. On top of that, like it also allows a lot of like build optimization, where a very complex game usually allows you to build very complex characters, and in that you get to create all kinds of really really cool builds. And then over on the GM side, you also get to use some really really cool like enemies to fight back against them with. And usually, the stronger the characters can be, the stronger your enemies can be, and then you have all sorts of fun stuff to play with. And then you have a little bit of like that narrative nuance, and so it does this play into like the narrative, and in which ways does it do that? Now, on the other side of that, systems with what I'd say like a lower ceiling, a lower learning curve, you end up playing a lot faster, right? You get really into the game faster. Everyone, a couple sessions in, knows exactly what you're doing. You probably aren't even hardly touching that rule book anymore.
Yeah,
And then it's considerably more accessible. You newer players can play it, experienced players can play it. Maybe some players will get bored with it, but for the most part, with a really low learning curve, you can get into it. And then there's also that narrative freedom. I find that games with a lower learning curve tend to be more narrative, whereas games with a higher learning curve tend to be more tactical. And so it's really kind of figure out which of the two you'd like. Now, I'm not saying that a high learning curve game can't be narrative, or that a low learning curve game can't be tactical, but they tend to lend themselves in one way or another.
well, and if the system has very tactical encounter rules,
Right.
then it's not that you can't be have a narrative game. It's just that the focus is on the tactical combat more than the narrative gameplay,
Hmm.
or at least it's elevating that tactical, you know.
Right.
So,
Yes. Yeah.
but
And,
like
and
you
I think
said,
even at the table, it makes you feel that way. Like
yeah,
when you have a game that has a lot of tactical rules, it just makes you naturally want to play more
yeah,
tactically.
absolutely.
Um, so yeah.
But yeah, those low ceilings, they could be fast games.
Hmm.
It's not necessarily always have to be the 4 to 6 hour grind. of a
Hmm.
D&D session, you could play in a couple of hours.
Right.
You could play, um, you know, once a month, or you could play once a week. It's again kind of just depends.
Right. Yeah. And
So,
so, and then kind of looking at like campaign longevity. I don't know. It really, again, this is all kind of goes into your particular table, because I find I could sit here and say, games with low ceilings, that's not gonna have very much longevity. People aren't gonna want to play it, but that's not true. I mean, there's gonna be a lot of people. My wife in particular does not like learning new things, and so she will pick up one game, and that's just what she wants to play. I have severe ADHD, so I just want to learn new stuff. And so like I will play a game for a long time, and then I'm like, all right, let's try something different. And
yeah.
so my wife and I don't play board games a lot together, but that's not important, right? but but it really depends with your table and with your preferences. And so like sometimes people really just want to learn the game and they just want to play it forever, right? That's why I think it's one of the reasons D&D has lasted so long, is because people don't want to learn new stuff. They just want to keep playing the same game, maybe change out their character, change out the scenery, change out the missions and quests and stuff like that, and just keep playing your same rule set. And then but on the other
And
hand,
people
some
do.
people.
People
Oh yeah,
play
that's what I'm saying.
people play
Absolutely.
Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, they play
Hmm.
3.5. Yeah, like there has absolutely that longevity.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, it all just kind of comes down to where does that where does that
Mhm.
learning curve plateau?
Right. So, with that, I think that just about brings us to kind of what we wanted to discuss. Before we fully close out, Seth, what is your like your Goldilocks of learning curve? Like, what is your preference in game?
Oof. I mean, like, I appreciate some level of complexity.
Hmm.
Um, I don't want it to be like I do enjoy some very simple to pick up games for sure, but I think I enjoy more those games that have a little bit of I don't know. It's really the answer is like balanced. I like balanced, right?
Right.
I want some
Balance. Yeah.
crunch. I want a little bit of complexity. I
Hmm.
want some, I want a list of abilities or equipment that I have to keep track of. I enjoy that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, that said, I have enjoyed games that are very light on it.
Hmm.
Like City of Mist, we are currently in the middle of a two-part adventure,
Hmm.
and it was a very fast character creation, and was very easy to learn the basics, but it was also kind of that had that ambiguity of you can do anything, and
Right.
there's not guardrails, and
Hmm.
so sometimes it can be a little detrimental in that. um but yeah, like I said, I like the
Hmm.
balanced. I don't need the super heavy simulated adventure crunch of like
Hmm.
Traveler.
Right.
Um, I do like a happy middle ground.
Yeah.
How about you though?
Yeah. Um, so just for the record, that was the most boring answer you could give. But mine's exactly the same. I also like balanced, and I would love to say like I love one or the other, but I'm the same. I want that narrative. And I wasn't saying your answer was boring. I was saying balanced is just I feel like the safe answer that everyone
It
chooses.
is for
But
sure.
that's the same thing for me. It's like because I like a narrative game because I like story, I like creation, I like creativity, and so I like a game that allows itself to be narrative. I like a game that's open enough that okay, so maybe there's not a rule saying that I jump off the lizard's back and grab it by its tail and smack the guy in front of me with I don't- I like maybe there's not a rule for that, but I like a game that allows me to do that if I want to. But then I also like a game that is tactical enough, tactical enough that I have to think about what I'm doing. I have things I'm trying to level up and accomplish. I'm trying to build combos, and I'm trying to coordinate with other people. And like, there's a true, fear of dying and things of that. So I mean, I'm kind of I'm in the exact same boat. Like, I love a narrative game, but I also really want a good tactical combat.
Well,
Like a
And for me,
I like
it's
kind of a grindy
because
combat too.
I come from a miniature wargamer background before I was an
Mhm.
RPG player. And
Right.
so I want the grid with minis on the table
Mhm.
if I can have it. You know,
Right.
it doesn't have to be fancy. It can be a flat,
Oh yeah.
dry erase map, and the GM could draw the dungeon on it,
Mhm.
and we could have, pennies or glass beads for monsters, and
Right.
just maybe
Anything.
some
Yep.
like fun character tokens. Uh, that's all that I need
Oh yeah.
necessarily, but I
Me too.
like that tactical element.
Mhm.
But I do know some people who are like theater of the mind is the only way to go.
Yeah.
And
No.
I think theater of the mind lends itself to the other side, where it's like, you know
Mhm.
what? We're not doing tactical. So,
Mhm. And I think okay, here's where I think I'm gonna add a little nuance to mine. I think I do like cinematic, and so I remember with Draw Still they talk about how it's cinematic and really like as I say that word I'm remembering Draw Still and like how crazy it was what we could do, and it was very like
yeah.
it made you feel like like truly like the hero, like you could do impossible things. And I think that's one of the things like I don't know if you ever been like playing a TTRPG and like your turn's coming up and you already have it planned out and you're like, I'm going to move right here and I'm going to hit him and then it's going to pass through him and hit the guy behind him. And as that happens, I'm going to jump to the side. I'm going to smack this. And then you do it. And like, it has absolutely no effect on the fight. It's like, okay, you hit him, you did 6 damage, you hit him, you did 3 damage. All right, it's next person's turn. And you're like, man, I had such a cool move planned out there. Like I like, and I think it's one of the things I liked about like Draw Stills. Like when you did stuff like that, it made a difference, man. You
Yeah.
felt the impact that it had. And I couldn't even necessarily tell you now how it did it, but I remember feeling that way. And so I like a good tactical and cinematic combat and game. But okay.
Absolutely.
All right. I think we covered the topic pretty well. What do you think?
I think so. Again, thank you for joining us today. We have been a little absent. Uh, I will ask your forgiveness cuz it was partially both of us, but definitely
Mhm.
I was moving, and so into a new house. And so my computer stuff was all torn down, which is why we
Yeah.
had audio issues for an hour before we tried to record this. And so
Right.
um so hopefully we're getting back into the regular pattern of things probably right before the spring season ends. But
Right. Right
hey,
before the season
then I'll
ends.
have the summer to work out all the kinks in the audio.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For
Um
sure.
so also, if you're watching the video, I have boxes on shelves behind me because
Yeah.
I do have a new office, which is awesome. I will have all of my. I've got a little bit of my BattleTech stuff up and some other miniature wargaming stuff up. I do have a shelf over here with some of my D&D books out, but it'll be full of all my hobby stuff eventually.
Nice. Yeah.
So, but that said, let us know what systems you found that were really easy to learn and play, or let us know about the ones that were really confusing or just turned you off with how much they didn't explain things, whatever it is. So leave
Hmm.
us a comment on YouTube or on our socials. Send us an email at rpgrundown@gmail.com, and we would love to hear from you. um, that said, again, be sure to check out the YouTube channel. Hit that like and subscribe. It really helps us. It's youtube.com/at the RPG Rundown LTN. That's LTN is for Love Thy Nerd. And if you didn't know, we are a part of the Love Thy Nerd podcast network, an organization dedicated to loving and serving our nerdy neighbors. So be sure to check out the description for a link to all the shows that are out in our network. We have everything from board games to wrestling and in between. And there's so much great content out there as well. So, well, with that said, thank you for helping us wrap up our look at learning curves and the end of our critical review discussion episodes. So, moving forward, we'll definitely get into either some more topics and also some more reviews as we have
Absolutely.
time. So, but from our table to yours, thanks for joining us on the RPG Rundown.
And until next time, may your rolls be epic and your stories legendary.